I was born a hustler. I was born that kid who would work out how to make money. I don't think the first half of my life was successful. I was wealthy and foolish, but I don't call that success. They recognized my truck, my sunglasses, my baseball cap, and my cross. And so it's just part of the identification. They go, oh, that's the gang pastor. We won't shoot him. We'll chat to him.
Andie, executive chairman of Post-Harvest Technologies, is a versatile leader with expertise in turnarounds, tech commercialization, and social entrepreneurship. Known as the Gang Pastor for transforming gang-affected communities in South Africa, he has also advised top global companies, unlocking potential in teams and businesses across diverse sectors.
I might die poor, I might die with a bullet in my head. Doesn't really matter. And I think, at the end of the day, everyone's business is between them and
Well, great to see you, Andie, and thank you so much for driving all the way from Blue Mountains here.
No problems at all, Lynn.
Well, as before we start, I told you to bring an item to show and tell. What have you got here for me today?
It's a long time since I've been at show and tell, I can tell you that.
I know.
The grey hairs show it. So, I got two things. One is this crucifix, which I don't ever actually wear in the West. It's literally the first time outside of either Africa or America that I've ever worn it. But I wear it when I'm ministering with the gangs, just in a church type environment. And also I wear it sometimes when I'm turning up to a new gang area because they recognize my truck, my sunglasses, my baseball cap, and my cross. And so it's just part of the identification. They go, oh, that's the gang pastor. We won't shoot him. We'll chat to him.
So if you're not wearing this cross and you walk down there, are you saying that they might misunderstand you as anything, or?
Pretty much everybody knows me because my ugly face has been all over the TV for the last 6 years. But Justin, yeah, it's more, to be honest with you, it's more actually that they see that and they go, yo, I'd love a cross like that. So I've got them hooked. It'd be like if they like Gucci or Versace and I'm wearing Gucci or Versace. It's kind of a similar thing, if that makes sense.
That is so interesting. We're going to dive more into that, the gang life after.
Sure.
You had the other item as well.
Yeah. I just bought a photo or a few photos of some of my gang boys in Cape Town. I don't know if this is in the right direction or not.
Yeah, you can see it, yeah.
Very sadly, this young man here, Leroy, is one of my first generals that I led to the Lord. He died 3 weeks ago, 3 bullets in the back of the head. So my heart's still very sore about that. But this one here, Preston, is like a son to me. He's kind of one of my heroes. Some of the same guys, they came to see me off at the airport when I first traveled after lockdown 3 years ago. They're like, hey, Pastor, we got to come to the airport to pray to see you off. A funny story, actually. I was at the coffee shop and I could hear this beeping in the background, and I see these guys, they're trying to come through the security scanners. They've got 9 mils, so of course it's going off. So they're pulling their 9 and going, no, don't put your 9 mils out. Put them back in the car. So they go to the car, put their guns, come back, and then we had coffee and then they prayed for me. So it's kind of a crazy world, and the same guys, some of the same guys, different guys, but yeah.
That is crazy.
Bunch of my boys from Cape Town.
Well, let's talk about your journey. I mean, how did a entrepreneur, what do you call the corporate boardroom guy, have anything to do with Gangland? I would love to hear your story.
Sure. Well, thank you. And first of all, thanks for having me. It's a great privilege and pleasure to be here with you. It was great meeting you up at the airport a few months ago now, actually.
Yes, and you inspired me to fly first class one day.
There you go. So how did I end up in the Ganglands? Well, it's a really interesting question, and the answer is kind of a long one. But the reality is, I was born a hustler. I was born, that kid who would work out how to make money. I remember my first business, so to speak. I was 8 years of age. I was at Sunday school. My mom would give me 20 cents. My mother, who's 95, would beat me if she heard this story. So I'm kind of glad that she probably won't. But she'd give me 20 cents to put in the offering plate. I'd put it in at Sunday school. I'd take 15 cents out. I'd buy 15 cents worth of sweets or candy at between church and Sunday school, sell them for profit, eat some of them, which is kind of why I'm fat, and then sell them for profit and put 20 cents back in the plate. So kind of born hustling, I guess, and kind of found my way into, as an entrepreneur and as an investment banker running a private equity business. And then really felt, I don't know, probably 15 years ago, I was in San Diego buying a coffee company for a friend of mine from Australia, actually. And I long story short, I found myself at a Christian rehab that evening called the Dream Center in Los Angeles. 1,500 bed disused hospital turned into a rehab for drug dealers, pimps, prostitutes, gang leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And I had a really transformational faith experience. I've been a Christian pretty much all my life, but at that point in time, the penny dropped for me in 2 ways. First of all, the Lord convicted me that each of these guys, ex-gangsters, et cetera, that are going through these rehab projects or programs convicted me on day one that they were the same as me. And as a very wealthy, very arrogant, white Christian male, the highest of all totem poles in terms of power in the world, so to speak, as in all of those categories, if you like. That was a pretty humbling thing, a pretty confronting thing. I had the privilege of preaching to them the next day, which was even more humbling and confronting. And then the Holy Spirit convicted me, actually, you know what? They're all better than you. Because they're not hiding behind the nice watch or the nice shoes or the nice car or the nice wife or whatever. They're basically butt naked in front of me, not literally but figuratively speaking, just facing their demons, and you're hiding behind all of this crap. And I'm like, whoa. So that was kind of a real transformation moment for me, where I went in my mind from being a righteous, rich, arrogant fool to being a self-righteous, rich, arrogant fool, and kind of, getting on the path to hopefully becoming something different. And then in 2012, really felt the call of God to South Africa. It was audible voice. It was it was literally like he was standing here saying, "Go to South Africa." I was like, that can't be right. But anyway, we tested it, and it certainly turned out to be the case. Turned up in South Africa a little over 10 years ago. I thought that I would sit as chairman of a number of, on the board, but probably chair, because that's what I've done for a long time, of a number of probably Christian charities, and that would be what I would do, But God had a very different plan, got a sense of humor. We looked, listened, and learned for a year, and then 1 year after we moved there, I started a little men's Bible study in a township, so a shanty town, a sort of impoverished area, an area that would make the worst part of Redfern back in the 80s or Mount Druitt look like, a palatial palace.
These are the people with guns, and this is raw violence.
Absolutely. And literally in the area of the size of this studio, you'd have 150 people living in this room, right? Like that impoverished. So some of the hardest done by people generationally in the world. So walked in, started a fire on a street corner. First week, 8 young men. Next week, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 200, 400, et cetera, et cetera. And then, kind of went from there. But we started with the kids in that community. We started serving that community. Those kids started doing heroic things, putting out fires because we equipped them with firefighting equipment, building houses after fires, burying babies, whatever needed to be done, we'd do it. And then not long after that, we started taking the same framework, the same thing. I get these kids to be heroes in a community into other communities. So I was taking colored kids, which is a South African phenomenon, but kids of color, into black communities to put out fires and help build 500 houses after a massive fire, et cetera. And then I was confronted with gangs in two ways on one particular fire rebuild. The first was there was a general of the 26 gang, one of the numbers gangs in South Africa. His name was Rodney, still a good friend. I had the privilege of working alongside him for a week and had the privilege of leading him to the Lord. But the whole community said, stay away from this guy because he'll cut you, from ear to ear in a heartbeat. And I looked at him and I'm like, he's skinny. He can't be that dangerous, And we became friends and had the privilege, as I say, of leading him to Jesus. And then about a week later, Rodney wasn't with us on that particular building, exercise, if you like. And we had 7 young lady gangsters or, young guys, 16, 17, 18, come and attack me and 8 of my boys with what we would call a panga, but here it would be a machete, like a big knife, and literally kind of like Crocodile Dundee kind of thing, like this is a knife, and I kind of went back to my first job when I was at school and at university, working as a bouncer at the Tivoli in George Street, and I grabbed the guy by the back of the head, and I was about to take him, do my best to take him down because he was threatening my kids, and the Holy Spirit whispered in my ear and said, hug him and kiss him instead. And so I pulled him tight, I hugged him, I kissed him on the forehead. He dropped his panga on the ground, started crying, and he said, uncle, can I have a hammer to build with you? And I went, wow, these gang kids have got exactly the same, challenges as my kids in the township, which is just poverty and lack of fathers and lack of agents. Lack of love, exactly right. And so 6 weeks later, went to the hardest core part of the Ganglands in South Africa, in a place called Manenberg, which then was the murder capital of the world. 15, 20, something like that, gang murders every single day, statistically in that area. And we started a braai, a half-drum braai, a fire, like a barbecue, I guess we'd call it here in Australia, on a street corner, but allowed Lecrae, so Christian, hip-hop or rap music, all these gangsters coming out with their guns drawn, like, what the F are you doing here, etc. And I'm like, are you guys stupid? I'm cooking dinner. And they're like, white boy called me stupid. We're going to enjoy killing him. And I said to them, I said, boys, you can kill me, you can eat me, you can do whatever the heck you want, but I'm hungry and I don't want to die hungry. So let's have dinner. And by the end of that, we were friends. And it's just kind of gone from there.
Oh my God, you're just an amazing man who's like fearless. There's so much to unpack there. I would love to go back to your childhood when you mentioned that you were a hustler. What was, growing up like? Why were you a hustler? Were your parents, poor or rich? Or like what was going on that made you become this kind of guy that is ambitious, I would call?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. My parents were pretty wealthy, actually. They were both doctors, very committed Christian doctors, had done well out of the medical practices, but also out of property investment, et cetera, et cetera. So they were quite wealthy, but they were first-generation wealth. They grew up dirt poor, like dirt poor. I remember when I was, probably 12 years of age, maybe 10 years of age, walking along the street in Cheltenham where I grew up and scuffing my school shoes, just dragging them on the ground. And my father got incensed with me, really angry. And I was like, Dad, what's going on? And he said, son, do you not realize how blessed you are? He said, I was your age when I got my second pair of shoes. So I think that tension between wealth and lack of wealth was probably a driving factor for me. And I think also the fact that my parents said you should study and do anything except for make money, because that will be what will help make you money. That was probably the thing that drove me to go, well, I'll do the opposite. So I did the opposite, and kind of found my way into success. The world would say I don't think the first half of my life was successful. I was wealthy and foolish, but I don't call that success. I call the last 10 years. I call it blessed, but if any part of my life was successful, the last 10 years has been the successful part.
Yeah.
The rest has just been setting
and
me up.
And you were
for
brought
it.
up Christian?
Yeah,
was your
100%.
household Christian?
Yeah.
And so when you mentioned that the first part of your life you were foolish or whatever else, what was your perspective? What was your learning from Christianity? Especially because I grew up not a Christian, and I only became a Christian 4 years ago. So it really, I really got hit with it, and I had a breakthrough. I kind of get it. Every word that I read, I'm like, yeah, I understand, because I used to live that way. And so I always do wonder, like, when you're so young, you don't understand much. And so, what was it like being a Christian back then versus now?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting, and it's something that I've unpacked with some of my siblings over the last few years, because my father passed away a year and a half ago, 94 years of age.
Wow, long life. Both of them.
I just saw my mum this morning, 95 years of age. I was tempted to bring a photo of her actually as the show and tell thing.
The last guest actually brought his daughter, so next time you could have brought your mum right here.
There you go. I could have brought my kids, but I got 6 of them. I don't have a TV, so that'd be a few too many to fit in the studio, but. So I, as I say, I've been unpacking a little bit recently, and I was born into a family where it would have been almost impossible for me not to choose my own Christian faith. It was just such a part of who my family were and my siblings, and I'm the youngest. I'm the rat bag of the family. There's no doubt about that. My siblings would agree with me. I was sent away to boarding school at age 7, and I discovered that. Many years later, that my siblings had unanimously voted that if I didn't go, they were going, or words to that effect. But anyway,
I love your honesty.
Yeah. So I, as I say, grew up in this environment where it would have been really hard not to choose faith. But it was a wonderful thing, because the things of the Lord and the things of the Bible were just part of my fabric, of my structure as such. And I count that as such a wonderful privilege, because the things of the world are pretty tempting. It's even as a young Christian man, as soon as I hit 15 or 16 or 17, to maintain my faith and to maintain my focus on the things of the Lord was really difficult. And probably for 10 years, it wouldn't have looked like on the outside like I was. And even after that. But so I think having that grounding was such a privileged thing, if you like, such a great blessing. But interestingly, I grew up, we talk about the love of God and the fear of God as being this kind of the left and the right-hand side guardrails of the highway, if you like. And I grew up in a very strict military-like family. And, I jokingly say, truthfully say, I called my father sir till I was 13, and I jokingly say my mum's 95 and I still call her sir. She'd be appalled if she heard me say that. But I grew up in a fairly strict military-ish, if you like, family. And so I should have understood the fear of the Lord, but had no understanding of the grace of the Lord. But I grew up understanding the grace of God and having no concept of the fear of the Lord. And I only really started to get the fear of the Lord probably 15 or 20 years ago, which was a wonderful revelation in and of itself.
And what happened? What made you become more fearful of God? Was there some?
Well, I didn't become fearful of God, to be clear. I remember being at Hillsong London, being invited by a friend of mine to go hear a guy called John Bevere preach. And I'd never even heard of John Bevere. The last itinerant preacher that I'd seen was Billy Graham at Randwick Racecourse in 1979. Because the Baptist church I grew up at, the pastor spoke on a Sunday kind of thing, And anyway, I was like, okay, cool, I'll come along. I'm seated there in the front row. That's what happens when you're in a mega church and you're wealthy, you get put in the front row. But don't tell anybody I said that. Anyway, I'm seated there in the front row next to John. He gets up to preach, and he preaches a message on the fear of the Lord. And the penny dropped for me. I was like, holy whoa, that's what I've been missing. I thought that I had a fire insurance certificate, and I was safe and saved, but then it didn't need to be a response because I was saved by grace. And yes, I was saved by grace, but the response was the fear of the Lord and what are you called to do with your life? And in my case, with the rest of my life, I was about 40-odd at that point in time and maybe just a little younger. And so that became kind of the burning question for me, how do I actually invest the second half if I live to be a long old age? How do I invest the second or so half of my life in hopefully serving others and building his kingdom rather than building my own empire?
Yeah. And was a penny dropped because you were living a life where it was all worldly and you had all the maybe material possessions, and was there some sort of not feeling fulfilled that when he mentioned that message, it kind of clicked? Or what was it that clicked?
You know what? Actually, it was a conscious decision. I heard what he said and I went, the penny just dropped. I went, wow, I've been getting it wrong. And so it was a head thing, which over a couple of years became a heart thing. It was a journey. It took a while to get to the heart. And it took it. I had all of the worldly possessions, etc. And I didn't think that they weren't fulfilling me at the time, but within a couple of years, I realized that they weren't fulfilling me. So it was a journey, but there was a penny drop moment, and then a journey for it.
And
to
then it was like
cement.
validation after that.
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
And so you were a hustler when you were young. Did you end up working for a while before you got into your own business? I would love to hear more about your entrepreneurship journey.
I've rarely worked for other people. I don't think anybody would be
You're
stupid enough to employ me. I jokingly tell people that I was never diagnosed with ADHD because I didn't sit still long enough to take the test, or else I say I have ADH. And then kind of just ignore the rest of the word. But so I have had some jobs, and I was very, very blessed and privileged to have some great jobs when I was a young man. But really, everything was kind of setting me up to do my own thing, if you like. And so from about 30 odd years of age, or 28, I think 28, 29, something like that, I've been building my own businesses for the most part. I've sat on boards of other companies. I run sit on the board as chair of a couple of companies at this point in time. One of which I'm the majority shareholder, one of which I'm a very, very minority shareholder. So technically in that one I'm working for others, but it's a really collaborative environment and, great privilege to do it. But yeah, I've built my own thing most of my 30 odd years or so in the marketplace.
Were your parents entrepreneurs themselves? Where did you get that entrepreneur drive from? Apart from not being able to work for someone, but were there any influence?
Yeah, definitely. My parents were definitely a big influence in that. I mean, they were entrepreneurs insofar as they started, their own medical practice as dermatologists, and then they had 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, etc. So they built multiple practices. But for them, their medical career was more about serving others and so on. So it really wasn't about making money. But the money that they did make, they then put into real estate investment and so on. And so, my weekends, even if we were in Europe on a skiing holiday or something, still the spare time was looking at real estate agents' windows or Mercedes dealerships. But usually one of those two things, and just kind of working out how to either invest in real estate, wherever that might be, and in my father's case, having a penchant for Mercedes-Benz. And so that penchant for nice cars also followed, not so much with Mercedes, but, nice cars.
So did you learn more from observing than it is that they were guiding you, teaching you the journey?
Definitely, yeah. I wasn't particularly close to my parents as a young man. They were, when I buried my dad a year and a half ago, he was one of my best mates. So really, really privileged to have just an incredibly, dear and deep relationship with him. But we weren't close in back in the day. And I think that was partly just because of who they are and who I am. I think largely it was just a generational thing too. It wasn't the generation where you can, be great mates with your kids. My two boys, Barney and Gabe, are being inducted, for want of a better term, as their form prefects or form captains or whatever at their little private school today. And I wish I were there. I'm happy to be here, but I wish I were there because I really want to be part of my kids' lives. I was of the generation where my parents might have liked to have been there. I have no idea. Probably they did, but it just wasn't the done thing. It wasn't even an option. The option was you got to work hard and somebody else will look after the kids until you get home that evening, and then it's your turn to look after them as such.
Yeah, that was that generation back then. And so which of the businesses that did you spend the most in? And talk about that business. Are you able to share some challenges that you went through? Because our listeners are either aspiring entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs themselves.
Yeah. Look, I think one of the businesses I had was a private equity business in London. Ran that for a decade or so, a little more actually, and we had some incredible success stories there. We bought an asset which became the third largest listed gold mine in Australia. Did just some wonderfully blessed and prosperous things. We also put millions and millions and millions of dollars into some things that became worth less than this table, actually considerably less than this table, which was one of the great lessons. I suppose I had two great lessons through that period. The first was, if you're going to do business in Africa, be in Africa. Don't try and run an African business from London. It's not going to work. And so that was an expensive but a relatively cheap lesson. When I say relatively cheap, it could have been hundreds of millions of dollars worth of expense lesson, as opposed to, still a lot of money, but a lot less than that. And the second, I think, was don't put your trust in people, put your trust in God. Keep that, in my case, that's my Christian faith, keep your eyes on the prize, so to speak, and love people, look after them, take good care of them, but they're going to let you down. Just as you're probably going to let them down. So don't put that as your guiding light, There's very, very, very few people that I would be surprised if they let me down in life now, and I won't be disappointed for the most part, because people are people and we all are sinful and we all, make stupid mistakes. I make more than most.
Yeah.
But just put your faith in God. Don't put too much faith in man.
So when you say put your faith in God, how do you know when it's an intuition, it's God talking, or it could be fear? Sometimes we judge. I always get really confused with that sometimes. When you're about to do a deal or you're about to talk to someone and you kind of have your guards up, but you're confused whether it's because you've been hurt before or is God telling you. How do you tune into that?
Yeah, look, there's a whole bunch of answers I can give you to that. I tell my boys in South Africa, my boys and girls, as in, the gangsters and the kids in the townships and so on, I say, listen, if you need to understand how to hear the voice of God, if it's in the Bible, it's okay. If it's not, it's probably not. Second is listen to that still small voice, the voice of the Holy Spirit inside of you saying turn left or turn right. But sometimes we can't hear that. We're in too much distress or we're in too much chaos and we can't really hear the voice of God. So the third thing I say is ask yourself, what do you think Jesus would have done?
I love that.
And that's kind of the third thing. But for me, at a practical level, that's kind of how I preach it. At a practice level, for me, it all comes down to peace. If I feel the peace of God, I'll turn left. If I don't feel the peace of God, I'll stay stationary until I get a sense whether I should go right or go left. And the only real exception to that is not in business. It's in ministry. I kind of have a principle, if you like, of playing what's in front of you. So if I'm sitting in front of, or if I'm sitting at the set of traffic lights and somebody comes asking for food, that's actually an interesting one because I might not provide it because I know that homelessness is something that you can actually, grow by feeding it, if you like, as such. But I'll still try and be discerning in that situation. But if somebody in one of my townships in Cape Town, for example, turns around and says, Pastor, my grandmother needs burying and I can't afford a funeral, immediately I'll say, okay, I'll help. Rather than going, Lord, do I help? If they're in front of me, then God wanted me to deal with it. I'll pray and say, hey, if you don't want me to do this, tell me real quick because I'm moving. And occasionally I'll get that kind of prompt of, no, don't do this. Doesn't mean I do everything. It doesn't mean I'll pay for the funeral. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Often it'll just be a case of saying, hey, listen, let me introduce you to some people who will give you a fair price on the funeral at the very least, so you don't get ripped off. And I promise I'll come. It might be as simple as that, or else I might preach, or I might run the service, or whatever the case might be. But I just have in ministry or in anything to do with mission, my principle is play what's in front of you. If it's there, unless you really feel God saying don't do it, just gently walk down that direction rather than staying stationary and saying, hey, what do I do?
I gotcha. And so when did you end up becoming a pastor? Was that in that kind of timeline? I'm trying to figure out. So at 40 years old was when you kind of had that penny dropped. Were you Were you active in the Christian world at that time, or was it still quite?
Yeah, no. I was very active in my faith and active in church and church circles and so on and so forth. But the honest reality is, I would call myself impastor or imposter as opposed to pastor. I'm not an ordained pastor. I'm certainly not an ordained priest. Funnily enough, I preach, hundreds of times most years, but in a sophisticated country like Australia, I doubt that I'll ever be asked to preach at, say, an Anglican church because I don't have a license to preach. So despite the fact that I've had the privilege of leading tens of thousands to the Lord, I don't think I'll probably have the privilege of doing that for even one person in a more conservative church environment here. When I moved to Africa, people instantly started calling me pastor. It's just kind of a cultural thing and a respect thing. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes a bad thing, probably a bad thing more often than not. But I avoided, like the plague, anybody calling me pastor. I remember the very first time that somebody called me pastor, I literally looked around going, where's the pizza, where's the red wine? Because I was thinking Italian restaurant, right? It was a prostitute who I had the privilege of leading to the Lord, but she was screaming at me, pastor, pastor, and I'm thinking, where's the Italian restaurant, But I allowed myself to be called pastor, even though I'm not ordained. I told people I was ordained at the McDonald's School of Theology because one of my daughters in South Africa, when I say daughter, a spiritual daughter, not a literal daughter, beautiful little girl called Jackie. I had the tragically sad privilege of burying her and preaching the gospel at her funeral when she was 15 in 2019, almost exactly a year before lockdown, etc. started. She died of HIV and TB, which is such a common thing for kids in South Africa. They're born with HIV, and TB, tuberculosis, becomes the thing that takes them out, And so for 2 years...
Is it the lack of vaccination? Is there anything that you can do?
There's not anything you can... Or can you? I think you can actually. No, you can vaccinate against tuberculosis, but you cannot have been exposed to it at all. So when I moved to South Africa with my own kids, we looked to have them vaccinated. And because they'd visited South Africa just once for a month, the doctor said, no, you can't get vaccinated now because if you've ever been exposed to it, you can't be vaccinated. So everybody in South Africa has been exposed to it through family and so on and so forth. So, there's almost no vaccination there, I think is probably a fair comment. But I remember for 2 years we nursed Jackie from near death, literally, to back to life several times, and then she eventually died. Actually, her cause of death was a heart attack at age 15 because the body just gave out. But about halfway through that 2-year process, she sent me a message. She was in the public hospital about 1 o'clock on a Sunday morning in a really dangerous area, and she messaged me and said, Uncle Andy, I'd love a cheeseburger Happy Meal. And I'm thinking, my first thought was, awesome, sweetheart, at 9 o'clock. In like 8 hours' time, I'll get my ass out of bed and I'll go get you a McDonald's Happy Meal. My second thought was, my baby girl wants a McDonald's Happy Meal. I'll get it for her. So I got out of bed, got in my truck, drove to 45 minutes or something to the only McDonald's 24-hour that I could find in Cape Town. I think there's 2 now, but there was only 1 at the time. Went to Kraaifontein Day Hospital, which is literally like a war zone. There's this 10-foot high chain fence or steel fence. On the inside is hundreds of women, predominantly women who've been beaten by their husbands and partners. And on the outside is their husbands and partners in a bit of a Mad Max type environment, banging on the fence, waiting for them to come out so they can beat them again. I mean, literally like that. So by the time I get there, it's 2 a.m, and I say to the security guard, I speak to him in pitch perfect Xhosa, which is his language. And I say, umfundisi here. No, I didn't say umfundisi here. I said umfundis, which is like teacher. I said, I would like to come in to see one of my people, please. I have some food for them. And he said, no, you can't come here. And I said, why not? He said, nobody is allowed here at this time of night. It's too dangerous. You need to leave. And he wasn't going to let me in. And I thought, the hustler came out of me. I thought, I've got to come up with a solution. So I said to him, I just asked the question. I didn't make a statement. I asked the question. I said, would you let a pastor in? and he opened the gate and he said, "Man of God, come this way." And I
Oh,
went, "Okay,
my
now I'll let
gosh.
myself be called pastor." So
That's a great story.
yeah, it's true though. Like, so I'm not ordained. I mean, I know the Bible reasonably well by God's grace, and I've spent a lot of time showing it and preaching it. You know, I love the saying of St. Francis of Assisi. It says that when sharing the gospel, use words if you must.
Yeah. And so when I met you, we were at the airport and you were talking about flying and we were talking about wealth and all that. And I think a really key question for me to understand and to help me digest is always this struggle around, you know, when you become a Christian, you kind of want to do more and give more. And I personally start to feel bad about personal wealth and building everything for myself, not for myself, but I guess the worldly possessions that we can aspire to. You know, what's your take on that in terms of, you know, the godly way, which is all about giving? And sometimes I feel like a lot of Christians even limit themselves from success because of this guilt of needing to give back, but at the same time not feeding themselves or not kind of building their own wealth. And so...
Well, I'll be honest and say I think there's a really bad doctrine called the Prosperity Doctrine or theology that's kind of, you know, eked into Christianity over the last 100 years, and I've seen it and I've experienced it and I've been tempted by it at times, but then I've gone, no, actually that's just not biblical. But you know, I guess there's a couple of thoughts I'd have there. The first is you can't outgive God. So, you know, God doesn't need my money. No pastor can tell me that God needs my money. God needs my heart. That's all he cares about. That's all he wants. Now, if me giving my money is a real token of me saying, "Hey, you really got my heart because that's the most important thing to me," then okay, that's nothing wrong with that. And certainly we're called to look after the poor. We're called to look after the widow and the orphan, etc. There's no two ways about that. But we can't outgive God. You know, we can't sort of see. I mean, as soon as I hear young Christian guys saying, I feel that God wants me to be in the marketplace to make money for him, I'm like, man, he owns all the money to start with. Who the heck do you think you are, you know? And so, yeah, so I don't feel guilty when I make money because in my case, I have the privilege of putting as much as I can into ministry and to looking after other people. I never feel guilty about it. I feel guilty about a lot of the money that I've earned and wasted over the years because I didn't use that for God's purposes. I used that for nothing other than my own self-indulgence, you know. So I think if you are working hard, earning hard, saving hard, spending hard, investing hard, and you're doing that looking after other people and actually just living life by the Bible, fantastic. Whatever that might mean for different people, it'll be different things, you know. I think one of the best things I ever heard at a Christian wedding at a young friend of mine. Well, he used to be young; he's now old like me. But the pastor preaching at his wedding, he said, "Hey, Kurt and Jill," he said, "Whatever you earn," he said, "give 10%, save 10%, and spend the rest with Thanksgiving." And I think that's a pretty good approach. Now, whether those 10% are the right numbers, etc., but give some, save some, and spend, invest, whatever it is, but just do it with freedom. Don't do it with a sense of guilt either way.
Yeah. And how about, I guess, spoiling yourself with a Ferrari or flying first class? Like, I think deep down I probably feel like there could be a judgment that, hang on, I thought you're a Christian and you're about giving and yet you're kind of giving yourself such a glamorous thing. You know, what's your advice on that?
Well, my first advice is I do fly first class, but I'm privileged that I've flown so much over the years. I've got a hell of a lot of points, and so I use that. My daughter sometimes gives me stick and says, "Daddy, you know, the poor people that you serve, they'll just be like, what the heck's he doing?" And I say to her, "Sweetheart, the poor people that I serve, they won't actually know what first class looks like." So, which is not an indictment on them; it's an indictment on me. So. And in my case, that's one of my weaknesses, if you like, but I try to fly there because I fly so much, and I just want to be comfortable and, you know, be able to turn up and get straight into it, whether it be business or ministry. And I pay for myself. I don't raise money for mission, for example, to then go and, you know, fly first class or anything. But in terms of the proverbial Ferrari or the literal Ferrari as such, I think everything's relative. You know, I like watches. You know, I'm wearing a nice watch. I like watches. I used to buy, you know, a $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 watch almost every single month, sometimes several in a month, and it was just profligate and stupid. I'll still buy watches occasionally now, but I'll buy them secondhand and I'll buy them really well priced. So
Yeah.
so there's a relativity as such to there's a stupidity and then there's a profligate,
Yeah.
and then there's wisdom and so on. And I think at the end of the day, everyone's business is between them and God.
Yeah.
And all God wants with us is intimacy. He just wants relationship with us. So again, I can't outgive him. I can't outbuy him. I can't outserve him in terms of the stuff I do with the gangs. What I do with, or what we all do with our money and so on, that's really between us and God.
Yeah.
But whatever you do, don't do nothing.
Yeah. I really love that. I think I got the message around. It's at the end of the day, it's you should care more about your intention with God, and it's all about the heart. If you're just being stupid and trying to show off and picking up the Joneses just to feel good, to rub it in, it's very different to working hard and then taking care of yourself or achieving the dreams that you've always wanted to, while taking care of other people.
One of the real tragedies in Christianity, I think, and in the church, and I say the church being the big C church, not just any particular church, is we have this tendency to want to pursue the approval of man, and so that comes in particular in Africa, not just Africa, but particularly in Africa, that comes out in what I would call pastor praise. So pastor this, man of God this, apostle that, etc., etc. I'll tell you a quick funny story. The very first time I went to a meeting, a fraternity of 16 or 17 pastors in Cape Town about a decade ago, I was the last person to introduce myself. I was the only white man in the room. They went around the room and it was pastor this and apostle that and bishop that, etc., etc. And I said, hey, I'm Pastor Carbonara. My kids still like to introduce me as Pastor Carbonara. But I think one of the real challenges is we love to follow man rather than just following God. And we live in a society, particularly in a lot of Christian spheres, where we get so used to people saying, "Oh, you're awesome, man! You're doing so well. You're great. You're great. You're great." And yet you could be sleeping with somebody else's wife, or addicted to pornography, or have stolen something from somebody, or whatever. But that's just not seen, right? And so we have this sort of titillation of almost worshiping the seen and ignoring the unseen as such. But with God, it's the other way around. He's just looking at our heart. He doesn't give a rip about whether I'm the gang pastor or not. I'm Andie to him, and
he knows everything.
100%. He knows everything. I think one of the with the gang pastor thing, for example, God doesn't need me to go save the gangsters. He doesn't need me to preach the gospel to the gangsters. He doesn't need me to go and create peace amongst them, etc. But he knows that he created me with the ability to do that in a unique way, and he gave me a unique grace. And so I feel like God with me in that situation is just like my own physical father was with me, which is I want the best for my son. And he created me to do that. And so when I do that and excel at that, it's my way of glorifying him. And from God's perspective, I see that as his way of saying, see, son, I made that for you. And allowing me the privilege of prospering in something that he doesn't need me to do. He can just speak and people will turn to him if he chooses to.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Looking at your gang life and then your business life, are there any cross lessons that you've learned? Like hanging out with these bad boys and you probably have to toughen up. Were there anything that you were able to bring into business or likewise from business into the gang world?
I was in a meeting in New York a week ago, actually. A week ago yesterday or the day before, so a week and a half ago. And a particular person I was with was kind of trying to pull the wool over my eyes. And I looked them in the eye and I said, sir, I have guns at both temples while I'm working out what's right and what's wrong most days of the week. I said, you're hustling me. Stop it. You're in the wrong. I'm not going to do that. And et cetera. And the guy just looked at me like, this guy's crazy. And I probably am. But anyway, look, the similarities between the two are extraordinary. One is hustling people in business, and I don't mean that in an illegitimate sense. But at the end of the day, you're looking at something and saying, "How can I make money for myself or for my shareholders or whatever?" Thankfully, a slightly more grace-filled half of my life. My approach is, how can I make money for myself and my shareholders and for everybody around the table rather than me. It's we rather than me. Which means sometimes you don't make money because you end up getting, screwed over as such because you're not just me. But I'd still rather that than and be able to wake up in the morning and look at yourself in the mirror and go, I may be a little fat and ugly and old, but at least I can respect myself. But where were we? I've lost my train of thought.
We were just talking about learning lessons.
Yeah. So, but the similarities between the two are extraordinary. One is about deployment of resources in a wise fashion to get a great result, and the other is exactly the same. So when it comes to lockdown, the reason that people call me the gang pastor, they didn't used to call me the gang pastor. I never called myself that. The gangsters started calling me the gang pastor, was because I started feeding them and helping them to feed their community at the very beginning of lockdown, because hundreds of thousands of impoverished people with no ability to save money because they don't get paid enough ever to save enough money to live for one day without working, let alone 3 months or 3 years. And so I looked at that situation as a businessman, and I said, I've got to deploy resources as wisely as possible. I've got to feed as many people as possible with a limited amount of money. How can I buy the least nutritious, least healthy, least expensive food as much as possible every day for the next however long this is? And it turned out to be a year and a half, so that we can feed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. So the parallels are actually, there's more parallels than not, if that makes sense.
And I definitely think it's beneficial to be an entrepreneur and then trying to use the lessons to help others, because you're really thinking about sustainability and being resourceful,
Correct. And I think the other thing too is, and this is the key to business in my book, the key to business is, if you make your people famous, if you make your people feel loved and respected and genuinely love them and respect them, not just make them feel it but not follow it up, then they will do well and they will prosper, and therefore you will prosper, et cetera, as well. It's kind of a virtuous cycle. And I think in ministry, and particularly in a third world country scenario, it's exactly the same thing. You don't get in there and try and be the king or the chairman or the boss or the CEO and bark orders and tell people what to do. You say, and this has been the secret, if you like, of our success, if you want to call it that. It's not success, but you know what I mean. People have noticed what we've done and how we've done it in Africa, and it's been that we turned up and asked questions rather than giving answers and so on. So when it comes to the gangs and feeding during lockdown, etc., we didn't try and make it all about the white guy who comes along and says, "Oh, here's food off the back of the truck. Aren't I great?" I'd say to the gangsters each morning, "How do you want to feed people today, and who do you want to feed? You guys make the decision. I'm just a taxi driver. I'm just driving the truck. You guys are the ones who are getting the credit for doing the work, and I'm thrilled with that." And I think it's the same thing in business. I'm chairman of a business right now. My primary job is to make my team famous. And then after that, everything else is taken care of. Because if I make my team famous, and when I say famous, if I make them feel loved and protected and looked after, if I say to them, you can't make a mistake. If it screws up, it's on me because I'm the chairman. But if it goes well, you get the credit because you're the guys, right? Then I, they won't get it wrong. They'll get it right. They'll run hard and they'll do a great job. And that's exactly the situation with that particular company right now. The guys are running hard and doing a fantastic job. And they know that they can just focus on the finishing line and not worry about falling over and being embarrassed because they can't make a mistake.
Yeah. Oh, that's gold. Especially a lot of, new entrepreneurs, or, even if they've been in it for so long, they think they should do everything. It's best if I do it, or only I can do it. And so it's all about them, which makes them stuck as well. Whereas your approach is all about empowering them and then allowing them to actually do all the work for you.
Well, it's also a realization that I know for 30-odd years now, I've said to my teams, hey, guys, you know what? I make a habit of employing people that are smarter than me. And just occasionally they've been cheeky enough to say that's not very difficult.
Yeah. But how important is it to also, when you hire people who are smarter than you, still oversee them, still monitor? Because I've faced with some challenges, or have seen people face challenges of hiring someone smarter and go, oh my God, you're too smart, just run with it, and then end up being taken advantage of as well.
So I'm gonna sound like a Pentecostal pastor for a second, which I'm not, just to be clear. Nothing wrong with Pentecostal pastors. Many of them are my friends. But I'm going to talk about the 3 C's in business. And the 3 C's in business for me are courage, competence, and then character. So you've got to have courage to create a vision that people will follow, and that you can create something out of nothing. Make something real that yesterday wasn't real. Make something possible that yesterday was impossible, etc. So that's the courage part. Then you've got to have core competencies behind that to actually build widgets or consult or whatever it is. But the key characteristic and the most important thing, and the only thing I look for when it comes, or maybe not the only thing, but almost the only thing I look for when it comes to hiring people is character. Character is a bedrock of every decision and decision-making process. And if you hire people with phenomenal character, everything else will sort itself out. So my chief of staff, a young man called Josh, the smartest young man that I've ever had working for me, literally. His character is, I think, unimpeachable. Now, if I'm wrong on that, that's my choice. That's my bad choice, not his bad decision, because he can't make any mistakes. If he makes a mistake, it's on me. But he's a super smart young man, and he doesn't make mistakes because he's got great character. I'll be honest and say he messaged me first thing this morning because he's gone away for 2 days. And he left me a message and he said, "Hey, boss, I'm so sorry. I forgot to do one thing." So he didn't make a mistake. He just alerted me that he didn't get a chance to do something, because that's great character. Lack
honesty.
of character would hide that or blame it on somebody else or just ignore it, etc. So if you employ based on character, you can't get it too far wrong.
Yeah, I love that. And so as you juggle between the gangland and business, like how do you separate your time? How do you prioritize the two?
I've absolutely no idea. That's the honest answer. Look, I'm really blessed that it just kind of seems to blend together fairly well, So I spend, of my own volition, a fair bit of time in South Africa, obviously with the Ganglands and so on, just having moved back to Australia for the first time in 20 plus years, less than a year ago. But we're also doing quite a bit of business with this particular business that I'm chairman of in South Africa, and we're buying another business there, etc. So just by God's grace, and it really is His incredible grace, I have the ability to fly somewhere, have business meetings all day long, and then at the night, have a fire and lead people to the Lord. Go home, get up at 3 a.m, go sort out some gang piece, go home, get 2 hours sleep, and go back to another board meeting. So, I couldn't honestly give you any answer other than somehow it just seems to happen.
Yeah, and how do you balance family life as well? Are your kids a bit older now that you can do a lot more traveling?
Oh, I forgot about my kids. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, look, I try and take them with me from time to time. My youngest boy, Gabe, just turned 14. He's like, "Right, Dad, when are we going to New York?" I'm like, "Next trip, I promise I'll take you,"
Do you rotate between them more? Like you spend one-on-one with them more?
I try to. I haven't actually done it nearly enough in business because it's pretty tough, because often I go for 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, and it's, I'll have 18, 20-hour days and 15 or 20 meetings a day sometimes, not every day, but, something like you just have this insane, we had a 6-week trip for this agritech business that I'm chairman of, 6-week trip over the summer or the Australian winter in the US, and I think we flew 60,000 kilometers and drove 18,000 kilometers or something. It's kind of like to Perth and back a couple of times almost. And I had thought about taking my youngest son on that trip, and I thought, this is just going to be too punishing for him. And it would have been. It would have been unfair. It would have been literally cruel. Fun for a moment, but cruel. But yeah, I do try and take them when I can. Was meant to take my eldest daughter on a trip this year, but haven't managed to do that as yet, but hopefully next year. So look, my kids are they're really adaptable kids. They were born in one country, lived in another, then lived in another, then lived in another, then went back to the country of their nationality. So they've kind of lived all over the world. They're pretty adaptable, at least so far. None of them are broken. They're amazing kids, which is largely because their mother's a good person. So, and their father, despite the fact I've tried to mess him up, I haven't succeeded too well.
So one of my previous guests said that one of the biggest tip around success is actually marrying well. So would you say that you married well? You have a wife that's taking care of the kids while you're traveling and pursuing your purpose?
I can say nothing other than yes, ma'am. Otherwise, I'm in big trouble. But no, absolutely. I think, kids are a partnership. There's no two ways about it. Business is a partnership. Ministry is a partnership. My whole family, wife, children, adopted children, were like a well-oiled machine in the first few months of lockdown, making hundreds of thousands of food parcels. I got the credit for it. I shouldn't have. I didn't want it. I didn't ask for it. But I was the person in front of the news cameras. They're the ones who are doing the hard work. It's absolutely a team effort and so on. And I think that's the case. I remember seeing, I think it was Zig Ziglar. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was Zig Ziglar. It's like 30 years ago when I was a very young man in business. And I can't honestly even recall if I saw him on this occasion in live in the US or if it was on a video, VCR probably back then. But he was invited along to speak at a businessman's, once again, misogynistic language, but that's what it used to be called, at a business person's conference or breakfast or something. And there's 5,000 people in the room from memory. And they get him up. They paid him a fortune to get up and tell us all, the wisdom of life and the world and business, etc. And he gets up and says, "Do you want to know how to succeed in business?" And everyone's on the edge of their chair going, yeah. And he says, "Love your wife."
Wow.
And he sat his backside down.
Oh my God.
So
I've never heard that, but yes.
But even if you weren't married, the concept, the principle is the same. Just find that bedrock, the bedrock principle or principles you need to live by, which if you're a married man is loving your wife. If you're a married woman, it's loving your husband or your wife, etc. I realize things are different these days than they were when I was married. Get the core things right, and everything else will take care of itself.
And what would you say the most important thing to look out for when you're getting married or finding that right person? Because you mentioned before character when it came to hiring a staff member, but for a wife or someone that you will last long, what is key to it?
Find somebody whose eyesight diminishes faster than yours so they don't leave you when you get ugly. No, but in all seriousness, I think it comes down to everything in life, in my experience, comes down to relationship, right? It's all about trying to build relationship between you and God, God and God and God and man, God and man and man and man. And the same thing when it comes to, and most importantly, if you can't be friends, preferably best friends with your wife or your husband, it's not going to be a lot of fun. You got to be able to actually want to go for a walk and talk and just chat, or be happy sitting on a train together and not talking. But it's not because you don't want to talk.
Shared value?
Yeah, definitely. I think faith is a really key part of it. I don't think that you have to be married to a person of the same faith. The Bible says that we're to be equally yoked. I'm not 100% sure that I would necessarily limit that to, or just say that's just purely for a marriage scenario. But I've seen some phenomenal marriages between Christians and Muslims and so on and so forth, and it's just it works. But for me, having that commonality, that's kind of at the end of the day, the thing that binds me to my mom who's still alive and to my siblings whom I don't even like at times, but we still have this common thing, and that's our faith. And the same thing with my wife, and the same thing with my kids, the same thing with my adopted kids. We've just got this commonality of faith, which is kind of the line that keeps drawing us back to together, where other things could push us apart.
I love it. So what does the next 10 years look like, or 20 years, like the future? Where do you see yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I certainly didn't see myself being as old as I am ever. So
you're going to live to at least 95.
Yeah, well, hey, my family might not be quite so happy about that, but we'll see. Look, at this point in time, until God tells me otherwise or he takes me home, there's a great saying I heard. I can't remember who I heard it from, but it's indestructible until I'm called home. And so, you go hard at it until God says, that's it.
And you're just really enjoying the journey right now.
I love it. I love working with the gangs. I have great privilege doing that. And it's my focus has been South Africa most definitely. That's where my heart is. That's where I've got hundreds of thousands of people who either call me pastor or their pastor. And I call son, daughter, et cetera, et cetera. I love them all dearly, some even more than others because I know them better. They've been in my home, I've been in their home, et cetera, et cetera. But so, my hope and my prayer is that I can keep doing that until God takes me out of this earth. But in any event, to keep pastoring or ministering, just loving, looking after people, et cetera. And I love the business side of things. I'm blessed and gifted in that space, and I have a lot of fun, a lot of satisfaction, and so much more satisfaction when you've got passion and purpose, and the ability to then use the funds that God gives you to actually affect change rather than just buying another watch or another Porsche.
I love it, and you definitely have been someone that's constantly taking the leap of faith and always trying new things, pursuing it, and not everyone can do that. They always feel a lot of fear. So what would you say to someone who, that sounds all good. I would love to start a business one day. I would love to even give back and help. But that there's that kind of sentence that goes behind that. What would you say to them to give them a bit of advice?
Well, I guess I would say, and particularly to young people, not just to young people, but particularly with young folk or younger folk, when they say, "Oh, Andie, but I want to start this business, but I'm scared I might lose everything, etc." I'm like, "Well, what have you got?" And they're like, $10,000. Do you have a house? No. Are you married? No. Do you have a car? Yes, it's on lease. So what have you got to lose? Like, almost nothing. If you're 50 and you press reset because your business doesn't work, etc. If you're meant to be in business, if that's actually a calling as opposed to just a heart's desire that you want to pursue, Romans says the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. So if you really are called to be an entrepreneur, you're gonna fail sometimes. I've failed spectacularly. But that's some of the best lessons. That's some of the best bedrock for success. You just got to keep going. So, but I think I saw a wonderful interview with, I think it was 20 from memory, 90 or 95-year-olds who obviously were pretty close to their deathbeds as such at that age. I guess this is like 15 years ago. It was an interview, and the interviewer said to them, 100% of them said, "What's your one regret in life?" And do you know what the answer of every single one was? It was the same answer. They said, "I wish I took more risks."
Yeah.
What is, like, I'd much rather hit the finish line, crashed and burned, busted up knees, almost dead. Well, I'm going to be dead that day anyway, right? So it doesn't really matter, right? Take it all with, take it as hard as you can, and leave it all on the playing field. I might die poor. I might die with a bullet in my head. Doesn't really matter.
You die with no regret.
Yeah, die with no regrets, and die, unless I'm totally wrong on my faith, and I don't think I am, die meeting Jesus. We misuse that saying, I think, the best is yet to come in church a lot, where people will go, the best is yet to come. And for some people, that means next week I'll have a BMW, whereas this week I just had a Honda, for example, right? But my view is that the best is yet to come means until the moment that I die and I meet Jesus face to face, the best is yet to come.
Wow. There you go. You conclude it so well. So thank you so much, Andie, for your time today. I had so much golden nuggets. I want to rewatch this episode. So thank you again for coming all the way here for us today.
At least there'll be one person who watches me. Hey, bless you. Thank you so much.